Hello and welcome to A View from the Bridge. My name is Joel Lammy. Delighted today to be joined by Dr. Dan Plumley, who's a senior lecturer in sport finance at Loughborough University. Dan, how are you this morning?
Yeah, thanks, Joel, for having me on. Very good, thank you. Really looking forward to chatting through some of this stuff around cricket. So yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
No, brilliant. I mean, we're doing something slightly different today. This is about sort of more to do with off the field than on it. So you co-authored a new report into looking at county cricket finances. Do you want to explain a little bit about what the report is and some of the findings that you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's done with an industry partner called Leonard. They work in insolvency. They're a big firm in the UK. So we've partnered with them from the academic side of things to do some business of sport reports in lots of different union at cricket, obviously, which is the second edition of the cricket report that we're launching at the moment. And then looking at golf as well as another sport. So it's a business of sport series that Leonard Curtis are running in terms of their side of things. And yeah, as you said, I've been involved in co-authoring from the academic side of things, which links to my background in sport finance. That's my teaching profession and research area. So yeah, we've put together a financial analysis kind of state of the game report, but also there's a performance index in here that covers some financial and sporting factors that has been published as part of my PhD originally, and then has since been transferred over into lots of different team sports. So there's an academic methodology behind some of the findings here, and as I said, a wider sort of state of the game finance report, and this is the second edition.
No, absolutely, and it's interesting. So obviously, there's an index in there which sort of ranks each of the 18 counties by sort of finance and sporting performance from 2015 to 2024. Not to come third in that. Now, obviously, last year we won the county championship, so hopefully next year we'll be potentially be even slightly higher up the ranking. But sort of how do you kind of put that together, and how do you sort of decide, how you rank a county by their sort of performances on and off the field?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. And as you said, I'll come back to the position of Notts in that in a moment. But the model essentially covers 5 financial variables that have, again, and this has been a model that's been refined over time. So it's been checked and stands up to scrutiny in the industry and in academia as well. So there are 5 financial markers: revenue, profit or loss, net assets or liabilities, the equity position, net debt, and wages to turnover as a sporting metric, because we know a lot of the cost associated with professional sport is on the playing side of things. And then you've got 3 sporting indices, which essentially look at the performance of the team across the various competitions, as you say. So the county championship, the T20 Blast, and the One Day Cup, as the data has been collected. Now, the index itself, what we've done there with that is we've taken a 10-year view. So the position of Notts within that index, as you say, they sit third in that table overall for the 18 counties across a 10-year period. So all those metrics are looked at cumulatively over time, and then there's weightings assigned and a model that produces the overall performance score. And in that regard, as you say, Notts sit just behind Surrey and Hampshire at the top of that. So when you kind of break that down a little bit, and we might get into a couple of specifics around what drives some of that. Obviously, if your revenue is higher than your competitors, then you would get a slightly better ranking on that revenue variable, and so on and so on. So as you alluded to a minute ago, if your sporting performance in one particular season is the best or is better than last year, and again is better than your rivals, so they're all ranking against each other, then you would anticipate maybe a move up that table. But as I said, with the overall performance model, because it's based on 10 years, what you tend to find is that you need a few years to shift the dial on that, so to speak. So again, if you've got sustained performance over time, and you get that kind of in a 3 to 5 year window where things are going very well, you would expect some movement in that table. But if you look at the data that we looked at last year with the report and this report, Notts are comfortably in that that top 4, top 5 of counties across the board, and there's some benefits that obviously come with that, with Trent Bridge and being a regular test match ground, and the finances that come with that as well.
Absolutely. What was interesting, I thought, was so 4 of the counties seem to kind of be dominating in terms of the finances, aren't they? So
yeah.
I think Surrey obviously were comfortably in the way. We've got Lancashire, Warwickshire as well, and not sort of sit just outside that. I think one of the concerns that's been raised in the report is that the counties which host 100 sides and, by and large, host test matches as well, it's sort of pulling away financially from those who don't. And I guess that's a bit of a concern going forward, I suppose. But also then how do you kind of address that? Because it only feels like, the gap's going to widen.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is part of the main focus of the report and the recommendations and the discussions that we think should come from it. So you're absolutely right. The data is showing us a clear picture. You've got some very well run, well structured counties that are dominating the landscape, certainly in a financial sense. And of course, sometimes that then transfers into on pitch success. So in the model, that's why you get them ranked higher year on year. And you mentioned Surrey there at the top, and other counties such as Hampshire and Warwickshire, and they have set a bar. And there are, you put Notts in that group of that top 4, top 5, certainly top 6. And you look at some of the things there that have enabled that to happen over time. One of them, as we've alluded to, is the fact that it is a regular on the test match hosting circuit and has been historically. England internationals as well, one-day internationals, all that comes with it. And then you've got the other counties that haven't had that, and are not able to generate the revenue through there. So there was already a gap that was there. And as you rightly said, the 100 has the potential to widen that gap. And I think one thing that comes through clearly in the report, and it's obviously been mentioned a lot in media commentary, and it's the thing that the game is talking about, is how does the ECB, and therefore how in turn does that feed down into the counties? How do they really use that money and the windfall from the 100 to help everybody out, for want of a better term? How does that transfer down, and or should it, and how should it? Because I think we all believe that it should. We want some of those smaller counties should be benefiting from this, where they're not hosting a 100 franchise. That was part of the way it was set up. But the intricacies of that are really tricky. And of course, then you've got clubs that are counties that are voting for things in their own interest. And so you've got a governance and power dynamic as well that can't be ignored. But certainly there's a lot in this report that we would say, that there are ways to tackle this, and there are things that cricket can do, where hopefully in the future, we still have a strong county game that feeds into the England test team, and everybody grows, and the gap kind of closes a little bit. But I think you're absolutely right, Joel. At this point in time, there is a clear gap, and there is a danger that gap continues to grow. And I think that's one of the worries. And the final thing I would just say on that as well is, because of the way that the data is publicly available and at what time it is, as we're talking right now, this report can only look at the previous year's financial information. So we can't see yet where some of that 100 money has gone directly in the club accounts. That'll be in future versions of the report, but it is absolutely a relevant topic to be talking about.
Yeah, so you said the report mentioned some ways in terms of how you can kind of tackle this divide, so to speak. What would you suggest as maybe some of the best ways of doing that?
Yeah, I think we've chatted a lot about this, and as you say, some of the findings are in the report. There are ways and mechanisms you can look to do that. So is there a possibility of a kind of reverse distribution model, whereby some of that money is I know some of it is ring fenced for player development, and it has to go into what we would consider to be good investment. So player development, infrastructure. There's that sort of angle to it. In the future, do you use some of that money and potentially the commercial growth or the new broadcasting deals that it brings with it? Do you distribute that differently across the network of counties? Do you almost do kind of American style approach to it and do a reverse allocation whereby some of the non-test match hosting counties or the non-100 franchises, that they get a little bit more of the pot, and the teams that have it don't. Now again, that's tricky because everybody wants their own pot of money, and there's vested interest in that, and I understand that completely. But there are mechanisms you can put in. Could we see in the future some sort of transfer style approach in cricket like we see in football? Could we see things around financial regulation, around, again, using football as the example, but a version of profit and sustainability regulations in cricket? I think the answer to all those things is yes, we could, and they are viable options to consider. But that is a wider question for the governance of the game and where it wants to take it. So those kind of things obviously get decided, in the boardroom, and the ECB have got a huge part to play in that. But I think in terms of some recommendations or ways forward, there are options on the table, is what I would say.
Yeah, the transfer window one, sort of finance one, was sort of the one I was most interested in. So I guess at the minute you get to sort of June, and players who are out of contract can speak to another county about moving. But I suppose maybe then having a compensation scheme in place, so some of those smaller counties, to use a want for a better word, get some sort of compensation as a result, because I think that might be a good way of sort of redistributing money. And not a perfect example of one county in the past have reached out to other Midlands counties and taken some of their best players, and I guess it probably seems fair that maybe they should get some reward for the hard work they've done in developing these players.
Absolutely, I think that's a really good example of a practical. We might not even call that a solution. It's an innovation in the governance and financial structure of the game that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's something that again we've chatted about with Leonard Curtis, and when we've been discussing this, and hopefully some of that comes through in the report as well. But I think it's absolutely a viable option. There's a way in which you can see that working, and there is a player development section in the report that speaks to that. And we know that the example you've just said there happens. It's going to happen. You will have players that will come through some of those smaller counties, size-wise and financial-wise, and at some point they'll be taken on potentially by some of the bigger counties. That's professional sport. That's life. But what you could do is, as you say, building a mechanism there where if we start to bring in some sort of transfer fees or as you say, how that's structured, and almost like a transfer levy pot where, like you say, some of that money gets ring fenced and is then distributed to the counties that have developed that player and have given them the opportunities. I think that's absolutely a way forward, and is something that you could see benefit in the game in the future. And the other thing, of course, there is where you start moving players for fees, so to speak, is there's a revenue upside to that, that for counties. There's also an incentive in a way to develop some talent, and you see the sell-on clauses in football as an example. So I'm not saying the transfer system is perfect in football, and you have got to be careful, but there are absolutely things that cricket could look to, and maybe already is in some aspects because of the way the franchise models work, and the auctions that we've seen for players in the 100, and of course that's very much a trodden path of the IPL and other leagues around the world. So, we're not too far away from some of that anyway. And I think these are, as I say, the really interesting conversations for us about, what the data is telling us in the report, but also the so what question. And that's the applied nature of it, and where you can really get into some interesting conversations.
Is there a danger, though, that we lose counties? Because I think that was always the talk about, we need the 100 because without it, counties will disappear. Is there existential threat still there for some of them, do you think?
I think there are challenges that the game still faces, is the way I would phrase that. I don't think we're on the brink of county collapse. I think obviously again, and we look to history as a guide, we saw what happened with Durham and obviously the ECB bailout there. We know that some of these counties are struggling financially. I think the benefactor approach that the ECB take in many respects is again, it's clear in the report that some of those counties are perhaps overly reliant on the ECB money, and that is a risk. We have to be clear on that. It is a risk in the model. And again, that goes back to the things we were talking about a little bit earlier about, okay, so how do we shift that? How do we potentially negate that risk to a degree? So I don't think it's kind of catastrophic if we look at the report as a whole. The game is moving forward, and there's a lot of growth opportunities in the future. But I think the warning signs are there for some of those counties. And then again, it's about, right, so how do these counties support each other, look after each other in a financial sense through the ECB and through mechanisms that you can put in, so that we have a thriving first-class county system in this country that has 18 counties. And of course, what you don't want to see, and I mentioned the Leonard Curtis report that we've done in rugby union, where halfway through that 10-year data set, you have lost 3 clubs because they've gone to the wall, and nobody wants to see that in cricket. So yeah, I think that there's a real concern there, don't get me wrong, but I think we're at a point now where the game can help itself in the future, and hopefully that happens, and the counties can then grow along with that, and find their own place in that ecosystem, and as I say, hopefully thrive. Because I guess there's a question in there about what's the overall mission or North Star that you're aiming for, and I think, again, from the outside looking in, that's about, for the ECB, obviously putting the best England side out there in the tests, in the one-day internationals, and if that's the goal, then the counties still have a huge role to play in that, but all of the counties, not just the big 4 or 5.
And I suppose the concern is, if nothing is done, then the gap's going to widen even more, isn't it? You're going to see
100%.
And I'm a Notts fan, but I like to see a competitive ecosystem, and I guess what you're more like to see is the sort of counties like Notts will continue to be able to invest more and offer bigger contracts to players, and you're going to kind of see that it's going to become more like a sort of a Premier League, isn't it, where you kind of have the haves and the have-nots, I suppose.
100%, Joel, absolutely. And I think, again, that is, you've just kind of nailed the point that was in my mind. If you do nothing, then nothing's going to change. And you can see that in the numbers and in the report, as we started out with the 10-year picture that I alluded to. If you track that data, we could track it 20 years and we'd still be getting a similar picture. And if you do nothing right now, then we could sit here in 10 years' time and I could say to you pretty much the same. Yeah. Surrey are doing well, Notts are doing well. That those counties that have got access to the test matches and the 100 franchises, and the ones that are doing above and beyond, and Surrey are the benchmark there in terms of over half their revenue comes from the events and conferences and other things that they do that are not cricket related. So if that just keeps on happening and nothing else happens, then some of those other counties are likely to miss out, and the gap will likely widen for sure. So yeah, I think, look, I'm sure that's front and centre of the ECB's mind as well. I don't think they're kind of ignoring that, but it does present challenges, and again, it's as much a governance question as a finance question. But you're absolutely right. If you do nothing, we could sit here in 5-10 years' time and we could say, well, it's more of the same.
Yeah, you mentioned governance. Do you think there's an appetite of the ECB and amongst the counties to do something about this, or do you think that there's a sort of a collective shrug of the shoulders? We've kind of seen the non-hosts, I've been having discussions between themselves, but is it likely anything's going to change?
I would like to think yes. I think is my optimistic kind of answer to that. I think and we've dealt with the ECB as part of this report, and they are, they've fed in some things here and there, and you want them to be a part of something like this. This is not, this is a collaborative approach, and you want it to be, you want the industry's voice on it as well, because they're the ones that are, as I say, in the boardrooms making those decisions. So I think there's an appetite there to, to continue to grow the game and again, we're going to talk about the 100 windfall. We have to, because that is a huge amount of capital injection that's gone into the game, far beyond what it's probably ever seen. And that in itself creates a challenging question of, right, what do we do with it? And the ECB have set their stall out, and it's now the case of, you've got to then follow through on some of that, and we've got to see what that looks like. But I think they are receptive to that. And again, I think, it is a governance question, and sport sometimes, not just cricket, but professional sport in general, it sometimes just sticks with the way of doing things. Like we said, it can be a bit resistant to change, and there's an old school style of governance there that perhaps need bringing up to date a little bit. And I'd like to think, again, that's where some of the opportunities here, and the ECB seem to me to be receptive of that, and again wanting to push the game forward.
Two final questions. One, the Notts fans listen to this. They should be probably quite proud of how the club's done over this 10-year period. They've won a few trophies. They've obviously done well financially, despite not sort of having the, maybe hotel conference type facilities that other counties have. Do you think, Notts fans should be, quite pleased with how the county's being run?
Yeah, I would say so, looking at the report, as you say, and if you look at that holistically in terms of Notts against the wider county system, as you say, there's been, some measurable success there over the years. And of course, again, the advantage of Trent Bridge being a ground that everybody knows about and looks to on the test circuit, and the iconic nature of Trent Bridge in Nottinghamshire is something that, again, you can build on that and leverage that in the future to come. But yeah, if you look at the numbers and the data, they're certainly one of the best performing counties across the last 10 years in our report. And I think there's also a question there is interesting you touched upon, and this is, again, is from a fan perspective, is always the way as well that you get into those conversations is you can't be all things to all people. And I think if you ask the fans, are they happy with the measure of success at Notts, a lot of them would probably say yes, because they understand that there is these clubs of someone's got to win and someone's got to lose, and at the end of the day, that is professional sport, and that's where the league tables are generated, and we analyse and pore over the data. But Notts are certainly up there, and if that's a level of expectation and it's brought some success, then I think the fans come on board with that. I guess the big question, as always, is right, where are we going next, and what's the next phase of that journey look like? And that kind of chimes to some of the things we spoke about already on this show around, how structural things in the game will help and benefit counties, and Notts are well placed to capitalise on some of those things that might happen in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final thing, the report also talks about women's cricket as well. I guess there's an opportunity there for it to grow. And I think we see it in women's football all the time, where the talk is about, well, clubs can't afford a women's team. It's they're losing money. But with women's cricket, you kind of see an opportunity there for it to kind of stand on its own 2 feet and be profitable if given the right investment and right opportunities.
I think your last point there is vital to that argument. It's the right investment, the right opportunities, and it's deliberate and it's strategic, and that's what it needs to be, and that's how you can grow the women's side of the game. And again, we've started to see this with the 100, haven't we? From the outset, with double headers and things like that are trying to integrate both the men's and women's team for the benefit of the county or the franchise or however we're looking at it. And it's very deliberate, it's very strategic, it appeals to new audiences. There's a vision behind that works, and I think there is absolutely growth in that side of the game. And I would always say with that, the trick there is to be deliberate with it and don't see it, as you said, don't see it as a loss maker. It might have to sustain some losses, and it does at the moment. You have to invest in it, and you've got to look at the organisation, the county, and financially the organisation as a whole, and it has to be a part of that. It can't be separated, or it has to be brought in, and it has to be really attacked from a strategy point of view. And I think if that's where if you go down that road, that's where again you will win in the long run. And I think again it's important to understand there that we have to play the long game with it, and that's okay. And as I say, that's when you start to be more strategic with it. But for sure, there's growth opportunities in the future. And again, some counties and franchises are probably in a better place to tackle some of that now, and might get a bit of early mover advantage. But I think the opportunity is there across the board.
Absolutely. Look, I could talk to you about this sort of stuff all day. I love it, but we know you need to get on. You have a conference at Edgbaston to look forward to today. I'm very jealous I can't make it. But thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to obviously this time next year seeing what's changed, and also done hopefully a bit higher up, potentially having won the championship last year, and maybe that'll above Hampshire at the very least. So Dan, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for your time today, and hope everything goes well with your conference.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate that. And yeah, lovely to chat. Thanks for having me on.